Picture this. You have been studying a new language for, like, years, maybe even a full decade.
Oh, yeah, a very common scenario.
Right. You've put in the hours, you've got the vocabulary flashcards memorized, you understand all the complex grammar rules on paper, and then the moment of truth actually arrives.
It always does.
You step up to the counter at a coffee shop in a foreign city, or, maybe you just run into a native speaker right in your hometown. You open your mouth to order a simple cup of coffee, and suddenly, nothing. You completely, entirely freeze up. Your mind just goes totally blank.
It is the absolute dread, right? The barista staring at you, waiting for your order, while your brain frantically searches through these mental filing cabinets that suddenly seem, well, completely empty.
It's terrifying.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's a very specific, very universal kind of panic that affects almost anyone trying to apply academic language learning to the real world.
I mean, you have the words somewhere in your head, but in that moment of real-world pressure, they just evaporate. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a brief but incredibly insightful set of sources today, all about language acquisition.
And it's a fascinating topic.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to uncover something called the 15-minute fluency plan. It's this strategy designed to stop treating language like some, static, dead subject you study in a library, and start treating it as a dynamic, living skill.
Yes. And the best part of all this, no heavy textbooks required.
Thank goodness.
Right. Which is a profound relief to anyone who has ever stared at a wall of verb conjugations trying to memorize them by rote. The source material we're looking at today fundamentally reframes the entire cognitive experience of learning how to speak.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can actually get into the mechanics of this 15-minute plan, we first need to understand exactly why our traditional approach is failing us so spectacularly when we are standing in that coffee shop.
Right. We have to look at the root cause of the freeze. And the source material points out a really fascinating flaw in how our educational systems condition us to approach the task in the first place.
Okay, what kind of flaw?
Well, it notes that most people treat learning a language like learning a history subject.
Oh, like memorizing dates of battles or the names of historical figures?
Exactly. You sit down, you memorize facts, you drill the static information into your head, and you expect to just be able to retrieve it perfectly on a test.
Right.
In cognitive psychology, we call that declarative memory. That's the conscious recall of facts and events. But the transcript makes a crucial pivot here. It says language is not a set of historical facts. Language is a muscle.
A muscle. I like that.
Yeah, it is much closer to a motor skill. If you don't flex it, if you don't actively use it in a dynamic way, it stays weak, no matter how many declarative facts you've memorized about grammar syntax.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, the source actually uses this brilliant analogy. It says that the way we normally study is like going to the gym once a month, doing a massive, exhausting workout, and then wondering why you don't have six-pack abs.
Which is absurd when you think about it. It highlights the complete mismatch between our effort and the actual biological reality of how skills are acquired. You can't cram for physical fitness, and, well, you can't cram for fluency.
To build on that gym analogy, if language is truly a muscle, then traditional studying, sitting at a desk, highlighting a textbook, is basically like reading a 500-page manual about how to lift weights without ever actually picking up a dumbbell.
That is a great point.
Right. You might intellectually understand the biomechanics of a bicep curl perfectly, but your arm hasn't gotten any stronger. So I guess my question is the real problem here that traditional learning focuses entirely on perfection rather than actual utility? Because we get so obsessed with getting the grammar exactly right that we forget the whole point is just to communicate a thought.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the answer is absolutely yes. Knowledge, especially linguistic knowledge, is most valuable when it is actually applied.
Right.
Our traditional education systems reward perfection on written tests, which creates an intense fear of making a mistake. But more importantly, from a neurological perspective, infrequent, high-intensity studying, like, say, locking yourself in a room for 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon to cram vocabulary, it simply cannot build the neurological architecture required for spontaneous conversation.
Because spontaneous conversation isn't a slow, deliberate recall process. I mean, you don't have time to search through those mental filing cabinets.
Precisely. When you cram for 3 hours once a week, you are building short-term memory pathways. But speech, real-time conversation, relies on automaticity.
Automaticity.
Yes. Automaticity is the ability to do things without occupying the mind with the low-level details required. allowing it to become an automatic response pattern, like a habit. It relies on neural pathways that are thick, efficient, and deeply ingrained.
And you can't just build those overnight.
No, you build those pathways through frequent, low-stress repetition, non-agonizing, marathon study sessions that completely overload your cognitive capacity.
Which brings us directly to the solution. If sporadic, intense study sessions don't build that language muscle, we clearly need a different kind of daily exercise. We need a way to actually pick up the dumbbell.
Right?
And this is where the 15-minute fluency plan comes in. It utilizes dead time. Specifically, the time you'd otherwise spend just sitting on a train, a bus, or waiting in your car during a daily commute.
It takes advantage of those small pockets of time that we usually lose to mindless scrolling, and it repurposes them for highly targeted cognitive training.
The first phase of this commute plan is what the source calls the environment opener. For the first 5 minutes of your commute, instead of looking at your phone, you just look around you.
Just observe.
Yeah, you observe your physical environment, and you describe what you see in your head, but strictly in your target language.
And to be clear, no speaking out loud is required. It's just an internal monologue.
Right, right. The source gives a couple of great simple examples. You look across the train car and think to yourself, that man is wearing a blue coat. Or you look at the crowded platform and think, the train is unusually crowded today. You are just narrating the reality right in front of you.
It sounds almost too simple on the surface, honestly. But the mechanics underneath it are profound when you look at what is actually happening in the brain.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the source points out that doing this simple internal narration forces your brain to stop translating from your native language. It starts making direct connections to the physical world around you.
And that direct connection is the holy grail of language acquisition. We can analyze this as a crucial cognitive warm-up that prevents what linguists call translation lag.
Translation lag. Okay, how does that work?
Think about what usually happens when a beginner tries to speak. They see an object, let's say a dog. First, their visual cortex registers the animal. Then, their brain retrieves the word dog in their native language, English. Then it searches for the translation of dog in the target language. And finally, it tries to format that translated word into a grammatical sentence.
That is a massive multi-step process for a single word.
Yes, and that translation lag takes milliseconds. But in a fluid conversation, those milliseconds add up to a painfully obvious delay.
Yeah, I've definitely felt that delay before.
We all have. By the time your brain has done all that translating, the moment has passed, the barista is staring at you, your anxiety spikes, and the system just freezes. Your working memory gets completely overloaded by the effort of translation and the stress of the social interaction simultaneously.
But the environment opener bypasses that entirely. When you look at a man in a blue coat and immediately attach the target language words to the visual image of the coat, you are training your brain to skip the native language middleman.
Exactly. You're actively building a direct bridge between visual stimuli and the foreign vocabulary. It's a daily 5-minute cognitive warm-up that tells your brain, hey, we are now operating in a different linguistic mode. You are firing up those specific neural networks before you ever even have to open your mouth.
It's essentially booting up the software before you actually need to use it. You aren't walking into the coffee shop completely cold. You've been mentally living in that language for the last 5 minutes.
You are priming the neurological pump.
Okay, so the internal monologue prevents the lag and warms up the brain. But eventually, you are going to have to interact with another human being.
Right, you can't just talk to yourself forever.
Exactly. How do we translate that internal priming into external speech without retreating to the safety of one-word answers? That takes us to the second 5-minute block of the commute plan, building the reps.
This is where we move from passive observation to active construction.
The source calls this concept breaking the yes-no trap. When you are practicing speaking, whether with a partner, a tutor, or even just role-playing in your head, the absolute golden rule is that you must never give a one-word answer.
It is a phenomenal constraint to place on your own learning process.
The transcript gives a perfect everyday example. If someone asks you a basic question like, do you like coffee? The natural instinct, especially for a learner who is nervous, is to just say yes.
Oh, absolutely.
It's safe, it's grammatically correct, and you don't risk embarrassing yourself, but the rule dictates you can't do that. Instead, you have to expand. You would say something like, yes, I love it, especially lattes because they're creamier.
What's fascinating here is the specific mechanics of how that expansion works to accelerate fluency. By forcing yourself to move beyond yes or no, you are inevitably forcing the use of connecting words. Words like because and but, however.
The glue words.
Exactly, the glue words. They are the structural glue of fluency. When you use those words, you are naturally building complex sentence structures on the fly. You are practicing clauses and conjunctions organically.
Which feels a lot more natural.
It does. This completely bypasses the need for tedious, repetitive grammar drills. You aren't filling out a worksheet on how to use the word because. You are actively deploying it to express a real thought. It forces your brain to retrieve vocabulary and string it together in a logical sequence, all in real time.
I can completely see the value in organically building sentences like that, but I have to push back a little bit on behalf of the learner here.
Sure.
Isn't it incredibly exhausting for a beginner to constantly force themselves to expand every single answer? I mean, when you are first starting out, just understanding the question and coming up with yes feels like a major victory. Having to constantly stretch every sentence into a complex thought, doesn't that risk severe burnout?
It is a very fair concern,
Yeah.
and it is definitely cognitively demanding. But think back to the gym analogy you brought up earlier.
Okay.
If language is a muscle, and you're at the gym, doing the bare minimum, just saying yes, is like lifting a 1-pound weight. Sure, it's easy. You won't get tired and you avoid burnout, but your muscle's never going to grow.
Right, because there is no resistance.
Precisely. In cognitive science, there is a concept called desirable difficulty. Learning happens most effectively when the brain is adequately challenged. Forcing yourself to add those connecting words, to add because to your sentence, is simply adding a slightly heavier weight to the bar.
That makes sense.
That cognitive friction, the exhaustion you feel trying to find the word creamier, is the exact mechanism of growth. It's supposed to burn a little bit.
So the exhaustion isn't a sign that you are failing. It's actually a sign that the exercise is working.
Yes. And regarding your point about burnout, that is exactly why this is restricted to a 5-minute block. You lift the heavy weight for 5 minutes, and then you rest. You aren't asking the learner to do this for 3 hours straight. It is a concentrated burst of highly effective linguistic resistance training.
Okay, so we have the internal warm-up and we have the resistance training to build sentence structure. But there is a completely different kind of barrier that has nothing to do with vocabulary or grammar.
Oh, the psychological one.
Exactly. It's the moment of initiating the interaction. People still stand in front of native speakers, perfectly capable of forming a sentence, and just clam up.
Right. And it is rarely a lack of linguistic ability at that stage. It really is a psychological barrier.
The source identifies this as the fear of getting trapped in a conversation. It's the panic of, what if I start talking and I don't understand what they say back, and then we are just standing there in terrible, agonizing silence.
It's a very common fear.
To counter this, the final 5 minutes of the commute plan is dedicated to something called the graceful exit.
This is perhaps the most pragmatic advice in the entire transcript.
The transcript explains that many learners are absolutely terrified to start a conversation simply because they don't know how to end it. They are paralyzed by the fear of getting stuck. So the solution is to explicitly master 3 simple, polite ways to say goodbye.
Yes.
Memorizing and practicing phrases like, "It was great chatting, but I have to head out," or "I'm running late, but it was lovely to meet you."
This raises an important question, though. Why is learning to say goodbye so much more empowering than learning how to say hello?
Right, you'd think hello is the most important part.
You would.
Yeah.
And the answer lies entirely in human psychology. This step acts as a brilliant psychological safety net. What the source is revealing here is that building conversational confidence isn't just about knowing the right vocabulary or having perfect pronunciation. It is fundamentally about managing psychological friction.
It's about managing the anxiety of the unknown, which is incredibly counterintuitive. We usually think of fluency as knowing what to say to keep a conversation going, not knowing how to stop it.
Exactly. Social anxiety in a foreign language is deeply tied to a feeling of being out of control. If you initiate an interaction and have no idea how to cleanly terminate it if things go wrong, well, the stakes feel incredibly high.
You feel trapped.
Your brain literally views the conversation as a potential trap. But if you have 3 flawless, rehearsed exit strategies right in your back pocket, you regain control. The stakes are instantly lowered. You know that no matter how badly you fumble a sentence, you can always smile, deploy a graceful exit, and walk away.
Wow, it really is like knowing exactly where the emergency exits are before a flight takes off.
That's a great way to put it.
You sit down, you look at the safety card, you spot the door over the wing. You
Yeah.
know statistically you're probably never going to need to use that emergency exit. But just the simple fact of knowing it is there, knowing you have a guaranteed way out if things go south, it allows your nervous system to actually relax.
That is a perfect comparison. And that relaxation has a direct biological impact on your ability to speak. We talked earlier about cognitive load and working memory. Anxiety consumes massive amounts of cognitive bandwidth.
Right.
When your amygdala is firing because you are quietly panicking about how to escape an awkward silence, your brain allocates working memory to threat assessment.
Meaning there is literally less processing power available in your prefrontal cortex to remember the word for coffee or latte.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
By securing that psychological safety net, by mastering the graceful exit, you tell your brain there is no threat. You free up your cognitive resources to actually focus on the conversation at hand. The vocabulary flows more easily simply because you aren't afraid of what happens next.
So we have 3 completely distinct, incredibly targeted 5-minute blocks. The environment opener to warm up the brain and bypass the translation lag.
Yep.
Breaking the yes-no trap to organically build sentence structure through desirable difficulty. And the graceful exit to provide the psychological safety net, lowering anxiety and freeing up working memory.
It is a masterclass in treating language acquisition as a holistic, living process rather than just an academic chore.
As we bring this deep dive to a close, let's summarize the core thesis that the source material leaves us with. It really all comes down to one powerful guiding principle: consistency over intensity.
That is the ultimate takeaway from the entire methodology.
15 minutes every single morning, utilizing the dead time on your commute, is vastly, overwhelmingly superior to studying for 3 hours on a Saturday. You are building a daily habit, you are flexing the cognitive muscle regularly, and you are actively managing the psychological barriers that actually prevent fluency in the real world.
You are integrating the language into the rhythm of your daily life. It ceases to be a subject you study and becomes a tool you use.
So what does this all mean? It means it is time to put the heavy textbooks down and actually try it. Here is our challenge to you. The very next time you are on a train, sitting on a bus, or even just waiting in line at a coffee shop, try just one environment opener before you leave.
Just 5 minutes of internal observation.
Look around. Find a person, an object, a situation, and describe it in your head in the language you were trying to learn. Build that direct connection to the physical world.
And I'll add a final thought to mull over, building on that brilliant concept of the graceful exit. We've seen how mastering the exit strategy gives us the psychological safety to finally start speaking a foreign language. It lowers the barrier to entry by removing the fear of being tracked.
Yeah.
But it makes you wonder, in what other areas of your life is the lack of an exit strategy preventing you from taking the first step?
Oh, wow. That is a fascinating way to look at it.
Whether it's starting a new professional project, attending a daunting networking event, or trying a new hobby, how often do we avoid engaging entirely simply because we haven't given ourselves a safe, graceful way to back out if it isn't working?
Give yourself permission to leave, and you might actually find the courage to start. Because the next time you step up to that coffee shop counter, you aren't going to freeze. You've got your mental warm-up done, you're ready to expand your sentences, and if all else fails, you know exactly how to gracefully exit. You'll just order, grab your latte, and walk out. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.